Greetings, everyone. I am very excited today to be in conversation with Robert James Comer and the work that he is doing. He and I have been in conversation across the last few weeks. And Rob, I am just blown away by the work that you're doing. So I'm very excited to be in conversation with you today. And Rob and I will actually be doing a number of conversations because the work that he's delved into is so expansive. I want to have time to go into different aspects of it. But let me give a brief bio, if that's possible for you, Rob, and then we'll get into the conversation. But he is, and I love your description in your bio, Rob. He is a cosmic architect of the mystical. And I think that's a great description because Rob is also an artist, an astrologer, an author of the upcoming book, The Lost Octave, which I really encourage everyone to get. And I'm going to give his website and more information about the book below. He also is a collaborator with Robert Edward Grant in their process of deciphering the petroglyphs in the King's Chamber, which is what we will be focusing on today. And he's also part of the Quantum Mathematicians Team led by Robert Edward Grant. And part of what's so impressive about your writing and the work that you're doing, Rob, is your interweaving of your understanding of ancient wisdom, quantum physics, music, art, astrology, the I Ching, and more. So we're going to touch on some of that today and then continue our conversation. But thank you for doing this today.
Yeah, no, beautiful. Thank you so much, Heather, for this. And they all sound like amazing things, and they really are. It's such a beautiful journey, and yeah, been very, very lucky to have connected to Robert Grant, and a lot of our work kind of was coalescing like in parallel. And so it was really great to finally have an opportunity to connect with him, and really from that connection, the second time that we had that connection, he was then demonstrating the app about the King's Chamber. And I happened to be on this group, very beautiful group of very, very accomplished mathematicians and physicists. And it's just like a dream for me to be involved in this group. And so that's really how this whole connection of the King's Chamber came about. And I managed to bring context to the very thing that he was seeing. And then through that, we've basically pieced together this absolutely stunning wisdom that really has been overlooked, I would say, or unseen perhaps for thousands of years, which is, it's just miraculous to think that we can do this through technology, through a virtual reality app and through our knowledge of the stars. That it's now going to be such a gift for people to know this about the King's Chamber and the Giza pyramids and more.
And before we dive into that, Rob, can you describe a little bit about how this came about for you and the epiphany that you had on the Lion's Gate, August 8th of last year? Because so much has been coming through for you since that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start at the beginning, really, where essentially I had what you could call kind of like an awakening inner expression. And so from that was kind of like my opening into the mysteries. It's almost like something I never even knew was there. And so, but as soon as I started to look into these things, these ancient wisdom teachings, they just felt like that was just I just loved it. It was just my home. And so I just kept diving in. And of course, that whole external process of going into them is also an internal process of going inwards. And so this is where, 7 years down the line, it's actually going to be 8 years soon from that, is this fact that I've done so much of this inner and outer looking and finding and discovering that it led me into many different modalities, many different styles of learning, teachings, and I just loved all of them. There was no one particular path for me. There's a few that I really hold dear in my heart, but there's, it's this fact that we don't have to be we don't have to fit into one school, and so actually all the schools are saying essentially the same message, and that's what you find throughout. And so I've always been fascinated with the stars and astrology, but I hadn't, to be honest, I hadn't really, prior to the Lionsgate last year, I knew what I would say is what most general people that are interested in, astrology and things like that knew. It was really this epiphany that happened on the Lionsgate, which is I call it this sort of transmission through Venus, because Venus was actually in Leo at the time, and on that day was basically this geometry, this sort of knowing that came through, and it was just really a sort of a main 3 day sort of process of where I was just receiving this guidance to essentially stop all the other work that I was doing, which was also linked to astrology, but through a completely new design. I've designed a whole new astrological way of looking at things. But it was like, this is the wisdom that humanity needs to know to bring us up to date in order to transfer seamlessly into the Aquarian age. And of course, beautifully, it's done through the divine feminine, of course. And so it's this Venus geometry that I was shown, because geometry is one of my favorite things, and I draw it all the time. And it is just possibly one of the fastest ways to unlock patterns and mysteries and pattern recognitions. And so when you do that, you see geometries and patterns everywhere around you, and also you see them inside your own self, the consciousness. You see how all the archetypes are locked and revealed through these different geometries. So they're kind of like beautiful puzzle pieces that you can just unlock. And this Venus energy was so profound. I just knew in that moment it was just this Aquarian wisdom that was going to literally spell out so clearly all of the systems from the past, bringing all of the future consciousness into the now. And it's just going to be this beautiful segue to bring us up to date, to learn music in 2 minutes, to learn quantum physics in 5 minutes, to learn how, astrology, you can learn the whole thing just through a certain pattern. And so it's like when you have these keys, and I call them golden threads because that's how I kind of see them in my consciousness. I see these sort of dangling golden threads, and I know if I just pull that thread and follow it like a sort of a rope, like a guide rope, it's just going to take me into something amazing. And so when you build up this library of sort of keys, patterns, numerology, understanding of letters and energies and colors and music and crystals and all these things, when you build up these libraries, you can just apply them to everything and anything you do in your life. Anything you see or witness in a movie, all of a sudden you see movies or read a book, and you're like, wow, this is the story of the stars, like the Greek myths. And so it's no longer just a sort of a fantasy thing or a way to dream about possibilities. It's no, this is the archetypes of humanity. And so it just opens up to meaning, that everything's trying to show you the journey that we have to take. And and that's why we love to read the travesties and things, and the things that are happening in the films that are the bad against the good, because they're all happening within us. And so, but when we don't have the context of how does that connect to me, then that's where we just kind of see it as like, oh, that was a great thing to learn, but we don't really apply it. So what I've tried to do is bring it through what I call the levels of interpretation, and gradate it through that it's like this star wisdom that's above. We may know that what's above is below, but how do we bridge that? And so that's why when we use all these different mediums of art, of music, of crystals, whatever you're into, The lost octave is this idea of that it pulls it all together into a simple, clear understanding. And honestly, if you have no idea about any of these things, but you've heard about them or you're interested, then this is what it's for. It can be for somebody super advanced because you can go really into the very degrees and geometries and the astrology that is it's so detailed. But really, you can just sum the whole thing up in a few minutes, and that is such a beautiful gift. I think, as I said to you before, that higher dimensions or higher perceptions of reality are actually they may be more intricate in their layers, but they're actually more simplistic. And that is amazing to find out, because it seems like the third dimension seems actually kind of very complicated. But when you start to go into the fourth, fifth, sixth, and other dimensions of perception, they're all really the same patterns. And so what works in the fourth dimension cascades through all the other dimensions. So that's what I mean. It's that you can find these keys, these patterns, this way to look at reality through this, and then all of a sudden you unfold into all languages, all systems, all walks of life, from the cosmic to the the animal nature kingdom. It's all the same fractally. And so we may have known this in our in our sort of knowledge, but this is showing you how you can know this and really use it and integrate it for your life.
It's extraordinary in what you're saying, Rob, is it's so Aquarian. It so
Oh,
reminds
yeah.
of the constellation of Aquarius, the water bearer, pouring the living waters of, from my perspective, it's not only about the living waters that sustain us, but it's the living energies and wisdom of the cosmos. And you're tapping into those archetypal patterns that then hold all these layers of meaning. But I do love that image that you talked about. When you're at that higher frequency, then suddenly you see the patterns and the clarity that holds the complexity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we were sharing and speaking before, you know, I never quite understood my own sense of perspective until all of this mystery, and especially with astrology, because I never really experienced my reality from a human perspective looking up to the mountain. I always experienced myself on top of the mountain, being able to see down into the human sort of reality, you could say, as a kind of an idea. So, for me, this pole shift flip of perception and consciousness is really what this Aquarian age is about, is being able to see ourselves as the human going into this spiritual sense, which is what really the history has spoken of humans ascending into our spirituality. But really, we know now, in truth, with the Aquarian age that's come through and the ancient saints and sages, that it's no, actually, we're a spiritual consciousness having a human experience. And so that's why a lot of these things, it's like, well, it's already here, it's already there. And so there's been this gap of, well, how do I get there? Rather than, well, if you are it already, if you are the consciousness already, then it's already, where do you have to go? It is here. And so and it can seem really difficult at first in those our belief systems, but if you really just allow that to be your truth and you affirm that into your being all the time, then that's really when these realms just open, and the pattern recognitions allow you to find the context of what that then means for your now moment. Like sort of like an angel number or something. Well, if you had no idea of an angel number, you would just see the number and think, oh, maybe that's strange, or oh, that's coincidence. But when you learn a sense of what they mean, now I can see them along my journey, and it's telling me a story or giving me the guidance. But yeah, I think that's the Aquarian pole shift is, and it's really the Earth is sort of due a pole shift in the history but I think the Aquarian age is more about the sense of we have to do this pole shift within.
Yeah.
And so if we can do that first, then I feel that the cataclysms that happen externally to mark this pole shift, that, you know, all the other pole shifts have come along with cataclysms. I think if we can start to shift internally first, then I feel like the outside world won't necessarily have to have that cataclysm, because it's often it takes a crisis for us to change. So why not make the change and avoid the crisis? And so it's like this palindrome reflection idea of Aquarian wisdom, as say the top of the mountain from the bottom of the mountain, looking at the same thing essentially, but the completely different states of awareness or being, and how to live your life.
I mean, what you're saying is so profound, Rob, because it really is reflecting that Hermetic principle, that understanding, as above, so below, as it is within us, so it is outside of us. And that as we do this inner work, that you're really highlighting that ancient wisdom, that we don't need to seek the truth of reality outside of ourselves. And the ascension isn't departing from this realm to go to some transcendent realm. It is within us. And it is about discovering what's within us and all around us and has always been there. And as we awaken to that, then I think what you're saying is so significant. We don't have to go through this outer event to wake us up. If we're awakening in that inward way, then the outward world will manifest the reflection of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I feel that you get to experience through, you know, through the book, through the Lost Octave teachings. It's not just sort of another sense of ideas or another sense of perception. It's hard to sort of until you sort of read it and hear it, but it really is, because it's through this divine feminine, through the Venusian energies. It really is a living library that you're experiencing, and so then you feel it. It's something that you feel, and then these things just click into place, like, oh wow, I just never saw it that way. And then once you know it's there and available to you, you've crossed the threshold already. So this is why it's so beautiful, because I think this wisdom, it gives such reverence to the ancient ways and what's been before, and then also integrates it into the now, but also the future of how we experience reality in the future. And so I would say and we'll find with the King's Chamber that this sense of moving forwards in time and also moving backwards in time, this beautiful mirroring reflection, this is exactly the King's Chamber. This is exactly this pole shift of understanding. And I suppose you could perhaps even say it's maybe a masculine way of seeing perception and a feminine way. But of course, if you have the understanding of both, then it's an amazing thing, because you're no longer seeing it sort of just in its binary coding. You're seeing it from, you know, that fourth dimensional time and space, where you can be non-local to just your own personal view. You can be, what's the view from the birds? What's the view from the trees? And that's also an exercise actually that I used to do a lot when I first started, was to see if I could see myself from, say, a tree that's in a distance. And that's how, you know, like remote viewing, people start to bring their awareness out
Very
of just
Harmonic also.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, to bring your eyes away from just, you know, or your perception away from behind your eyes and see it from another view. And this is really how geometry works, because as you tilt, you know, pieces of geometry, all of a sudden you see patterns in there that you never could see holding it in one certain angle. And so this is this beautiful sort of, it's a spectrum of consciousness, you know, and it's not just this black and white essence. And I know it's all been said before, but now we can really make it into a context, and especially with astrology, because I think astrology is just absolutely flourishing right now. it's almost like, whereas before it used to be, like tarot cards are, is that fortune telling. Now people are like, oh no, these are archetypes that we play out. And it's the same with astrology. They're cosmic archetypes that are our journey. And that's why the book, the subtitle is actually Our Story in the Stars,
Mm.
because it's like it's the best movie for free that you could ever watch, and that's why I say it's the grand gallery, right? In the pyramids, the grand gallery before you get to the king's chamber. What's the grand gallery? The grand gallery is, source, God, consciousness, whatever this. It's the gallery that's up above you. And so when you can see that story, that's what gives you a clue as to, oh, if I play this out, what happens? What is my purpose? What does this character do? And so it's like it's all there for us already. It's already a manual for us. And so we kind of crash landed in these bodies, like from the stars. And it's like, well, where's the user manual? Well, that's why the stars are so dear to us. And that's why we have this sort of dream of and fascination with the stars, because really that is us being played out up there. And so if we can learn from the stars, then we can really make a massive difference, and change our experience on the earth.
Beautiful. And it is that understanding that wisdom in the sky is also mirrored in the energies and wisdom on the earth. And we can then open our perceptions, our awareness to that, and then be a part of that wisdom instead of feeling ourselves as separate. And I think that's another profound part of the Aquarian age, that we're coming back into that awareness that everything is interconnected. Everything is a part of the oneness. And also it's very much about reintegrating left brain, right brain ways of knowing. And I know that what you're doing in this book, I can feel it when we talk, is it's sharing an enormous amount of information, but it's about energy and experience, and you take it in a very experiential, intuitive way.
Yeah, absolutely. And because uh, the item or the thing that you're looking at, that is it in its pure essence. It's us, our individual perception, that give it the meaning, the context, and the and how it moves in the world. But the thing itself is pure. And so, and that's where there's we often see that as a sort of sense of conflict of right and wrong. But it's like, how fascinating is it? Amazing. We could be looking at the same thing and narrate a completely different story. And that's where the intuition comes through. You have to feel that story and meditate on it, let it come into your body, feel it sensory, and then you're like, oh wow, okay, that makes sense with this, and you piece it all together in your own way. And that's why this whole book, as you say, it's so technical in many ways. To take something like the I Ching and to move it into alignment with quantum physics was a huge breakthrough. And I had to learn all of this. It wasn't taught to me. And of course, that's all linked to the DNA. So I had to learn binary code, trinary code. I had to learn the human DNA genome. I had to learn quantum physics. So it's like, well, you think, well, that must be really hard to do, but actually, not really. Not when you find these patterns, and you'll see it with this, that everything links. But all of that technical stuff that often puts a lot of people off, and think, oh, I can't do that. That's why it's all narrated through the star law stories. And so star law is not, as you know, it's not LAW as in a law. It's LORE, which basically means it's the word of mouth. It's the tradition of passing on stories like we would have done sitting around the campfires or when we were children. And so I've always loved listening to stories. I think it's one of the human delights, is just to be immersed in that imaginative, creative world. And even if they're difficult stories, it gives us so much learning, and so simply, and it really embeds itself. Like somebody can tell a story and that one story could stay with you your whole entire life. And so that's why this book gives you all the technical stuff to kind of like please the left brain or somebody who's super into the technical parts. It has to be there, especially for our scientific time. It all has to make sense in that way. But then once you feel satisfied that you've got what you need, then really the delight is like the pudding. It's the dessert, is the story. And that's really how we can speak to children, and get them to understand the stars and the star stories and archetypes through these stories. And so really that's that's the fun part, because again, what's been spoken about in, say, like the Greek myths, as you were speaking about, that the Greeks had a certain perception of view, and we were speaking about the hero and the hero's journey, and the masculine that was all this hero. And so, but yet now we're seeing this shift that we could read the story about being self-empowered, that you are your own hero, and that actually when you tap into that essence within yourself, then you can break your own chains, you can save yourself from what you're going through. And so that's what the beauty of story is, that we can mold it as we become more aware, more conscious in our understandings. We can start to mold these stories into another narrative for our time. And that's really what I've done, is I've given the reverence to what the tradition held, and then also a new look at how we can perceive the same thing, but from this divine feminine view of Venusian Aquarian wisdom, which is so futuristic, but yet it feels so much more natural in a way. It's so beautiful, because we think it's like, oh, it's going to be something so ascended, but it's just pulling, it's like gravity, it pulls you back to your essence, and that's what feels so natural.
Part of what I think is extraordinary in what you're doing, Rob, and as you know, so much of my research and my passion has been really exploring wisdom traditions from prehistory, before this modern current era of the last 6,000 years, and the depth of wisdom coming from those ancient cultures, many of which had more of an oral tradition. And so many of the earliest written myths, as we know from the book Hamlet's Mill and their research of all the early myths, were star lore. They were stories about the messages from the stars and the movement of the stars. And you're reclaiming that and weaving it with quantum physics and modern science and understanding. And you're also reweaving that ancient honoring of the sacred feminine that has gotten lost in the last 5,000 years of this patriarchal period. And you're bringing that back. So you're really helping to weave back the wholeness of what we need to claim to move into this Aquarian age.
Yeah, no, that's so beautifully said. And yeah, I mean, it becomes so glaringly obvious when you dive into the mysteries how the feminine has been chopped out and taken sort of any sense of power and demonized in a way, but it's so weird, because that really it's never going to hold true, because we know that nothing is birthed unless it's through the feminine. So everybody knows that intrinsically. And so I think that's why, like, in a way, it's not going to be that hard for people to realize, like, oh yeah, that was definitely cut out, and that was sort of a shaped truth. As I say, it's an interpretation that was given as a sort of a fact, but it's completely not a fact. And so when we really go back to especially the etymology of things, we find that the original etymologies were all, at the beginning, was all feminine. And it's just amazing that we've accepted up until this point. Honestly, it kind of baffles me, really, that we've accepted up until this point that that's how it is, when all you have to do is scratch the surface a bit, and you can see so clearly every single tradition, even music. For an example, which I'll show in the King's Chamber, is that in the Latin, the do re mi, solfeggio scale. So as people sing, they say do, re, mi, so, fa, ti, do. And so that's the Latin way of musically toning. But again, you just scratch the surface a little bit of that, and you'll find that the first note that is do in that typically used today was actually ut, ut. Well, ut is when you extend it, it's actually uterus, which is the uterus. So, so really, it's the sense that that is the first principle. But in the same fundamental way, the way that it's in Tantra is that the feminine is there as this womb that's ready. And so, but really nothing can happen until the masculine makes the first move, essentially. And so that's kind of that's actually Tantra. So the feminine, say, like the dark womb is the void. But without the masculine making the initiative, or without being fertile, then nothing happens in the land. And so really that's where the sleight of hand has happened, because it's like, yes, the masculine has to make the first move, but it's the woman that's actually the zero that's kind of overlooked, so the masculine may be one, but the feminine that's the zero, it has to be there at the beginning. And so this is where that slight sort of slip of like, oh well, masculine is the first principle, and it's like, well, no, not really. There has to be something there for it to pregnate. So it always yeah. So it comes back to and that's why I find it really interesting with like the Fibonacci sequence starts with 0, 1, 1. And we would disregard it. Was 0? What is that? That's then nothing. Well, it's not that it's not a thing, but it's there. And so
it's the fertile void from which all creation emerges. Yes.
Yeah. And so, as I say, this brings us way into things that you find with numerology, that you'll see how 0 is actually really important. And in geometry, you can place zeros in places, and then it balances the entire matrix, which is something that I've done actually, which is, if it didn't have that 0, then it would be an off geometry. So this 0 is a thing, but a no thing. And so it's so important we can play with that as well. And it's like the number 9. I did a post the other day that say that 9 sums to 0. And it's one of those beautiful mystical things that when you're working with numbers, you'll start to see that there's so much play in all of this. And to take it so seriously of like, this is this means that, and it's like, yeah, you've got to embrace the mystery as a complete paradox, as it's this and it's that. It's it's not necessarily either or. And so this is why I find it a beautiful thing, because that's why I said about being a cosmic architect, because you go, well, I want to move here, but I'm actually going to move in a curve rather than a straight line, because I can, because it's more elegant, because it's more beautiful. It's not, and in a way, then you find out that it's faster to move in a curve than it is a straight line. Did you know about that?
No, I don't. But I'm also realizing that you're talking about the power of symbols, as opposed to disconnected words. Symbols can hold and encode so much meaning and so much information. And they're not some disconnected literal informational bit. They are holding such archetypal meaning.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love it, because as I say, a picture says 1,000 words, because yeah, like you can look at the number 1 and it's not necessarily a quantity, it's a consciousness in itself. And so, you can learn the law of everything you need to learn about the law of polarity. You can learn it through the number 1, not the number 2, which is really baffling, because you think, oh, hold on, polarity, most people's idea of polarity is that there's 2 things. But when we look at a magnet, it's one thing with 2 different expressions.
Mm.
It's just like that. All of a sudden, that's what I mean. Everything in your life that you do, you start to realize that they're not counter opposites necessarily. They are this one thing that's expressing itself in two different ways, and so this is how we can integrate it so quickly, and that's just by looking at the number one. So you know, as you say, these symbols, they're just these icons that we can focuses of consciousness we can just allow to absorb into us, and we just receive. And it's not even, you just have to think on it, meditate on it, contemplate it, and then you start to experience it. So yeah, it's a wonderful thing, and I think it's bringing back this joy of all of this. There's so much. We're looking for answers, and we're looking for things to help us, which is what we need also. But when you discover this for yourself as you're going through this, it's not the answer you're necessarily wanting. You're trying to figure out how the universe, or your expression, your movement within the universe works. Because even if we get an answer, sometimes there's a belief that we don't, that we're not going to accept that answer, or we come across our own fears about that answer. So nothing breaks down fear or your beliefs quicker than when something just unveils itself within you, and you find and discover how it works. And then you don't have the fear anymore. You don't have the beliefs are gone. And it's so fast. It's very quantum in that way, and it's amazing. And something I'll just add into there, in the book, I've actually added a process of how to break your own beliefs instantaneously, which is a really bold statement. But if I hadn't have experienced it myself, then I wouldn't say it. But it's so amazing because, and I put it in the book so that, because I was experiencing as I was writing and learning all of this, and I was hitting perceptions or things that I couldn't see past. I couldn't quite figure it out. And, I'm sort of almost crunching, and things didn't fit so smoothly at this certain level. And I'm thinking, why does it just not make sense? Everything else makes sense, but this, I'm just stumbled. And then the next day I meditated on this, and then I had this like deliverance of, it was like a delivery from above, kind of thing, or from within. And basically said, oh, well, you just need to do this. And it was this method of how to change your belief instantaneously. And so I thought, okay, I'll try it. So I wrote down a belief that I had, and all of a sudden I thought, oh wow. And it's about palindroming. It's about reflections of how we see something, and it's about our wording of it. But essentially what it does is it starts to make your subconscious work for you instead of potentially against you. And so, the easiest way I could say this is that if you give yourself an affirmation saying that, I'm abundant, for example, and then, but really deep down, you don't feel abundant, then really you can't over will that subconscious. I mean, maybe you could, but that's going to take a lot of effort to do that. And so this is the thing that I was experiencing. So I think, well, I want this, or I want to experience this, but deep down I knew that that wasn't possible. And so then I had to flip the whole script, and somehow by doing that, and there's this really simple technique of doing it, all of a sudden my subconscious was giving me all of the answers why I was abundant.
This is great.
Right? So I say this because this is about this sense of seeing it from multiple angles, and especially the palindromes. And when you get into the numbers and the numerology and the I Ching, a lot of it's about these reflections. And so as I say, it's this reflection of seeing up the mountain, thinking, how am I ever going to climb this thing? Or you see yourself already standing on the mountain, and then you're directing your human self up that mountain to where you already are. And so like that's what makes it a joyful thing, without the fear. And so this essence is running through this whole book, and that's why I feel people are gonna learn so much and so beautifully, because all of this is linked to music. It's all music. It's all understandings of harmonies and how things work in coherence. And you can feel that sense of music that is aligning you, attuning you, inside. It's not necessarily just a hearing thing. It's a sense of attunement inside, which is it's yeah. You'll feel it for sure.
Let me just say this, Rob, and then I could talk to you all day, and we should probably jump into the King's
Yeah.
Chamber. One of the things that you're saying that really resonates with me, because as you know, I'm very, very interested in the ancient Egyptian wisdom, and I love their principle and understanding of that that archetype of Ma'at, which
Hmm.
is how are we in right harmony, right relationship with all that is. And you're really talking about how we can come back into that harmonic, and how we can then see things from that harmonic perspective. And then everything flows from that. And that is the disconnection we've been in, I think, in this modern historical period of getting caught out of harmony and in um, disharmony and disconnection that's led to a lot of destruction. And your work is helping us find our way back into that harmonic way of being, where we're in the song of the soul and the song of the spheres, and in right relationship with everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so beautifully said, because I think it just comes down to this sense of, uh, with dimensions, for example, it's sort of when you know there's another dimension, whatever you're experiencing in your life, it's a certain dimension. And when you know that there's always one more dimension, and so when you have that sort of methodology that, okay, there is another dimension to this whole experience, and just even knowing that is like gives you an open door to just move out of, in a way, your current, and take a breath and just see it. I sort of see it from that top down view, but however you wish to see it, but just knowing that there's another space that you can go to perceive what you're perceiving, and working with that, it's amazing, because we know that the third dimension can feel, it can feel quite restricting in a way, but actually it's massively expanded compared to a two-dimensional drawing. A third dimension gives you the first experience of perspective, which is amazing when you see it. And so then fourth dimension is like, wow, there's so much more room, so many more angles to look at the same thing. And so that's why, as I say, every one of the keys, I would say, the patterns that I found, is knowing that there is always a plus one, like the 12 zodiac signs that create the wheel. Well, no wheel that I know of moves without a central hub,
Mm.
which is a plus one. So if you look at any car tire wheel, you'll have the rim, but without, you need that center point, and that's the divine feminine. And so we could say 12 plus 1, or we could say 13, which is the divine feminine number. But see, there's always this plus 1. So we know there's these, the 6 chakras that we speak about going through, and the plus 1, the 7th, there's no root to that 7th one. It's the Ida and Pingala go to the 6th chakra, and the 7th actually opens by itself. There isn't a route to get from the 6 to the 7. And that's where this sort of sense that the plus 1 is there. You just have to let it unfold, know it's there, let it unfold. And then when you move into that space, it makes so many other things clearer. So that's one of the beautiful gifts I would share, is that just to know that there's always plus 1. There's always another dimension that you can see it from.
There's always the higher octave, the lost octave. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll just actually last thing I'll say about that is, which links to the pyramids, is that the reason why it's called the lost octave, which we'll go into more, but this sense of that when I meditated on that lost, it means that it was already so,
Mm, mm,
and it was just forgotten for a while. And this goes back to the oral tradition of the law, because I believe that this lost octave was actually a verbal teaching. Well, I don't believe, I know, but it was a verbal teaching only given to those initiates that were able to understand it at that level. Not that there's necessarily levels, but it's those initiate schools. You wouldn't necessarily get given the key straight away. You would go through this process so that when you did finally receive the final transmission, that it's like, you've got it. And so the lost octave is the sense that it wasn't written down. It was only given verbally, like they used to do in all of their mystery schools. The key teaching was very rarely written down. It was normally passed from, the teacher to the student in private, like they would do with sacred tantric practices of giving secret mantras. They wouldn't just give them to you on day one. It's not even that it's not so much even that they're secret. It's just the fact that you realize that you've done the work, you've worked hard, and you already know the answer, but it's just to have it confirmed. It's just that I feel the sacredness of that gift, and you understand its treasure. And so, like this, the lost octave is now giving back humanity that teaching that really is what I call the 12 master keys. That once you know this, then really you know a fair amount. You really know a lot of things. If not, you understand that interweaving of all things, and that's really the hope for this book, is to, as you say, for people to understand that interconnectedness.
It really is amazing too, because from the Hindu perspective of the processional cycle, we're coming out of the Kali Yuga, the time of forgetting.
Mhm.
And it is extraordinary what you're bringing through and what's coming back into our awareness as we're moving out of the Kali Yuga and into the time of awakening and into this higher consciousness. And that's part of what's extraordinary as we look at the King's Chamber, that what you and Robert Edward Grant are identifying has been in this chamber for thousands of years, but
Yeah,
not seen. And now it's emerging into consciousness.
yeah, beautiful. Well, that's a amazing segue to. I'll share the screen. Yeah, it's as you say, it really is a beautiful thing about that these these energies, this wisdom was always here. And it's a really funny one, because you really start to question time and space, and consciousness, because the lost octave is actually based, the geometry is based off of a 4D hypercube. And so the fourth dimension is really this understanding of time, and of course then space. So it's really quite interesting, because it feels like a lot of this wisdom is encoded in time, linking to a sense of vibratory state. So almost that when we raise ourselves to a certain vibrational sense of consciousness, that and if that aligns with the time capsule that these things were held in, then all of a sudden this library opens. And from what Robert Edward Grant found, for those that don't know, is that he started to see petroglyphs on the King's Chamber walls, and he was drawing them, and he had found Taurus the bull, and he's a Taurus, his sign, and so he had sort of mapped out these drawings, and he's been, I think he went there about 17 times, and he's been finding all of these different patterns on the walls that once he found them and could show them to other people, they started to then be able to see them also. So it's really interesting that it's almost this sharing of consciousness that at first, when you first look, you perhaps can't see anything. You think, oh, it's just a blank wall. But then when someone points it out to you, it's like, oh, and then it's like, yeah, I can see it. And then all of a sudden they then can start seeing other patterns themselves. And so there's this transference ability that once we show somebody something, then it's like they get it, and then they can apply it and they can start to see themselves. So how it kind of transpired, all of this beautiful wisdom and proposal, is essentially that Robert's launching a new app, which is like this super like 8K, ultra high D virtual experience where you can literally move through the King's chamber. And I think it's such a beautiful gift to give to people. And as he was showing the group, the mathematicians group that I was on, he was saying, oh, there's a picture of, I think it was a horse, and there was a lady with an arrow, and then there was an eagle. And of course, my work with the Lost Octave, one of the main parts was understanding the decans, the 36 decans, which was a really interesting journey for me because I'd heard of the Dendera stone, but I didn't really have any knowledge of it. And so this book moved me to learn about the Dendera stone and then the decans, and then that's really the star law, because there's 3 decans, as you know, within each one astrological sign, and so therefore we have 36 decans. And what it does is it allows us to look a little bit more at the nuances of one particular zodiac sign, which is beautiful because we can really understand these stories. And the decans is really where we get pretty much all of our Greek myths from, and a lot of our Christ stories are also in the decans. So in a way, all of the fairy tales that we've heard, I was just even writing a piece about Jack and the Beanstalk. That story is absolutely astrological, and it's it's just amazing because we hear all these things as children, or even as adults, and we're like, wow, I love this story, Little Red Riding Hood and this sort of thing. This is all the decans, this is all astrology, and that's why it resonates, because it's what we experience on Earth, as a human. So as Robert Grant was showing me showing the group the King's chamber and these petroglyphs, because I'd been working with the decans, I could recognize these decans, and they're not drawn in the same way as the decans would be, but the symbols are the same. And so when we had the eagle, Aquila, and then we had the arrow, Sagitta, and then we had Delphinus, I'm like, I can see this as he's pointing it out. And so I said, Robert, I think these are decans on the walls. And so from there, he was like, really? So he said, well, what's on this? He said, well, there's this on this wall, this on this wall. And so because I understood how it works in the astrological wheel, all of these drawings that he'd done were matching the decans in the correct order in the precession cycle, which was, as we were discovering it, it was like, no, this is just amazing. And even one of them, he said, oh, looks like this sort of eye here. He said, oh, is there anything with an eye? I'm like, an eye? Well, not really. I was like, but there is a fish, Piscus austrinus. It's like, oh yeah, it's a fish, it's a Vesica Pisces, and it was like, so it was such a beautiful thing to do it live. And it was just before he was going to to Egypt on the 12/12 portal last year. And so we were unveiling all of this, and then essentially we mapped out where all of the drawings that he'd done, where they would be in the wheel with the decans, and then that's why this is really the outcome of that, where we can actually now see which parts of the King's chamber are linked to which astrological signs.
It's really amazing to see. It's just beautiful. So, explain some of how you see the meaning in all of this and how it relates to these other layers, like the Last Supper, like the musical notes.
Yeah, absolutely. So the entranceway that you come in, so this wall here is the north wall. And so in Leonardo da Vinci's picture, this wall is actually lighter, so it's actually brighter. And then the southern wall here is actually a darker wall. And so the scene that you see in the Last Supper is this back wall. And I'll show a slide after this to show it more. So this kind of gives you a context that when you're looking at the Last Supper painting, because we know that the actual alignments of the painting fit the alignments of the King's Chamber. So when you're looking at the painting, you're actually seeing this back wall here. And the sarcophagus is in this space. So this is where the sarcophagus would be, and this would be where they're dining on the table. And of course, in the center is where the Christ figure is. So as we can see that essentially, as we move around the King's Chamber, that it's following the cycle, the processional cycle as we're going around. And so this idea of the procession of moving forwards and precession moving backwards is really, really profound. And that's this sort of sense again of this palindrome, this reflection of that it's happening simultaneously. We're moving through the signs, through the year, but yet we're moving in the precession through the great year. And so it's a really interesting idea. And perhaps, you know, in some way, maybe that's why the present moment is really the only true experience, because these two forces are, you know, working together. And so there is necessarily no future because the past is happening also. So it's this beautiful synchronicity in here. So yeah, it's really good to know these signs. And of course I labeled it here, like this is the we are here part, you know, in the great wheel. So we can see the sort of that this is almost like a processional cycle around the outside here. So relating to music, one of the beautiful things about the Lost Octave obviously is this idea of music that gives us ability to learn things very, very easily. And so I went through a quest of trying to understand the music of the signs, music of the planets, music of the spheres, the music of the King's Chamber, and the music of the sarcophagus, and seeing if I could piece together something that could be coherent for us to know. So I think it was John Stuart Reid, I think you had on your program a while back, that he actually measured the inside the sarcophagus itself is 117 hertz. Well, when you use a 432 tuning, which I believe is the most natural, Mother Earth's natural tuning, then it works out at the note B. Now, this was really significant because when I was looking up the planets, which there are planetary hertz frequencies, when I conversed them all together and I added them up, they created a note B. Wow. So all of the 11 planets that I added together created this note B. And of course, this hertz is octaves down from that note of all the planets, but of course it's still the same note. So that's really interesting that the sarcophagus is giving you the frequencies of the planets. So
amazing.
This is beautiful. And then from that, so that's the inside here. And the reason why I've put it in the middle is because this is how a hypercube works, is that you have a bigger cube and then a smaller cube inside. And so this also has a placement to do with Orion's belt also, which maybe I'll get into. But what I wanted to know was the sound of the King's Chamber. So we have the sarcophagus sound, but what is the sound of the King's Chamber? Well, to do that, I basically found that Robert actually measured that there was 137.5 sarcophagus that would fit inside of the king's chamber. And I think he worked that out with Adam Green, and basically from that I could measure then the frequency hertz of what it would be in that measure. And what was really beautiful was that offered me the note C. Well, of course, if you use a C octave, then you would start from note C, and then it would end with B being the highest note and the next C being the finishing of the octave and the start of the next cycle. So all of a sudden I had a whole octave. So I had from C note to B note, which I thought was really miraculous. So I knew from this, when I was measuring the planets, that I measured the sun, and the sun worked out at the note C at 126 hertz. Well, what's really significant about this is that on Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, he writes in the top corner 126.
Wow.
And it's to do with the doubling of the cube, doubling of the octave. So this sense that we've got an octave, you could say, you've got a sense of a note here, and then it's doubled into the king's chamber. So we've got this whole chromatic octave working as one. And so that's speaking about that if the king's chamber is linked to the sun, well, that makes sense that the sun travels through and around the walls, travels through the zodiac. And so inside are the planets. Well, all of a sudden we have a reconstruction of the cosmos, perfectly proportioned, perfectly harmonically laid out as a reflection. So the king's chamber, essentially, we could say, is a stargate of the human experience, to know yourself as all of this. And so I just think it's so beautiful that now we have this information and this wisdom, because it makes so much sense that that's what it would be, and that the sarcophagus isn't a sarcophagus of death. It's a chance for you to move into that fourth dimension or above and know yourself as one with the great grand gallery above us.
Beautiful, extraordinary. And it does so highlight, and you feel this in the king's chamber, that it is a place of initiation. It is a place of awakening. And it's really reminding us of who we are and how we're a part of the oneness of all that is. This is beautiful, Rob.
Yeah, thank you. So it's so wonderful to share it like this, and it's so simple when you look at it like that, and that's what I love. You know, we can get so much understanding, because you know, when we're looking at the opposite, the four fixed signs, we can see they create the cross in the king's chamber. And so this is really significant, because you know, all of those symbols we see of the fixed cross in all the iconography and symbolisms, it's also aligning to why this chamber was built in this way, and where these petroglyphs are. And of course, you know, when Robert was seeing these on the wall, he knew about some of the astrological significance, but of course to see it, that all of them fit in this way, it leads us to this knowing that really this is this beautiful stargate. And now linking it to the music of the planets and the sun, I mean, that just couldn't be any more perfect if we tried. So I went one step further. As you know, I love to really extract the most honey out of all of this wisdom. And so when I looked at the Latin of this, you know, again, you find yourself learning all sorts of things going into this, of languages of Hebrew and Latin. But I wanted to see what would be the message of the king's chamber if I was to view it in the musical tones. And so the solfeggio tones, well, the C note, as I said before, translates to its do, but it also in its origin is ut, the uterus, the feminine. And the B note correlates into today's society as Ti, but originally it was Si. Well, what's really interesting about that is that Ut is the womb and Si stands for Saint John. And of course, they didn't do a J, they had an I, which is Iones, which is John. So from that, this sense of these two notes being played or emanating within this king's chamber that replicate the planets, the sun, and the great year, what would be the message? And so I put here, from the cosmic womb comes the Christ, Saint John. Now, of course, this isn't something literal. It's like, oh, that's exactly how it means. But when you put it all together, what's it trying to say? The Christ symbolizes the sun. It symbolizes the sun, the king's chamber here. And the womb is that great processional cycle that the sun is moving through. And of course, Saint John is another, when we look at the poles of it, that Christ is born in Capricorn, while Saint John is connected to, John the Baptist connected to Cancer in the gate of man. So you've got the gate of the gods and the gate of man. And so they're really the 3 days in the tomb and the 3 days of when the crab is moving, across the horizon. And so again, we've got the 72 hours and 72 hours. And so this sense of that St. John and the Christ, they're really like mirror images of each other. And so this is what I think is beautiful, that we can now kind of get a sense of this through these translations, that this King's Chamber is trying to remind you that you are this, as a human experience, you're this sun, this divine golden child moving through the divine feminine wheel of experiences. And yet also you're that divine feminine of the great year of all there is of that cosmos. And you experience this sense of moving through it. So it's this beautiful hypercube of, we could perceive ourselves as this sarcophagus within this great cycle, but yet we're also this great cycle experiencing ourselves to be the sarcophagus. And that's what I mean in that fourth dimension seeing. We're both, and we're moving from both of those perceptions all the time and simultaneously, until it settles within you that you are both of these experiences. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful message, I feel, converting all of this through music into one message.
Through music, through sacred geometry, through the energetics that you feel in that chamber. And it is such an extraordinary sound chamber. I mean, when I've taken groups there to do toning in the King's Chamber, it just reverberates. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, I definitely think it must be like an amplification of, if you were to hear like the cosmos singing in a concentrated space, I bet that's really what it's there, and
Great description.
yeah. So as I say, all of this is, some people would say that this, it's just convenient, or how it aligns, or, but it's something this is why it's a mystery, and it's you have to dive into this and feel this for yourself, and listen to these notes, these hertz and frequencies, and see what effect they have on your body, because if you can palpably feel that, then maybe there's some deeper truth for you to open into. So yeah, my job is really just to present all of the information that I can through all of the wisdom and knowledge of all of these things, and say it's up for each one, I think, to confirm or experience within their own journey.
But this is so amazing, and so it really, I think, supports our awakening, Rob, and beginning to see things from this larger perspective, and again to feel how we're interconnected with all that is and a part of that oneness. So thank you for doing this amazing work.
Yeah, you're so welcome. And so I'll lead you on to the next one, but I just want to take note of this little guy standing here facing this west wall, because this makes a really profound discovery about the Last Supper, because this, the back of the person, so really what we can't see, is aligned to Aquarius. So when I go into the next slide, oh, yeah, here. Okay, so I'm sharing actually this for the first time, well, all of this actually for the first time with Heather and all of you, because we felt it was really appropriate to do that as Heather's going to Egypt. And so this is the Last Supper scene. And you can see that across the top is the order of how it was in the king's chamber. But what's really interesting is that the actual apostles, disciples, are actually in the order going the other way.
Interesting.
So we have a procession and a precession. So this is really beautiful. And, you know, I know that also in a way you could actually put it in the same order as what's above. It kind of works in that way also. But what I tried to do was, it was actually on Christmas morning that I had this vision that the actual constellations, the animation of the constellations are mirrored as people. And so we can really see that, you know, when you look at the neck here, following the neck of this is Aries here, Taurus is here, Gemini has the two hands, the bar, we even have the shape of Leo here, and see Cancer is following. See, the lines of the constellations match the actual figures in the image, which I think is really, really, really beautiful to see. And you can really see it with things like Pisces over here, you know, exactly where his hands are, you know, it's really beautiful. So that was my vision on Christmas morning of all times. And so this sense of precession and procession is really this key of again, of course, it's talking about time, fourth dimension, this ability to understand that we're moving forwards and backwards. And so the Christ is essentially symbolizing the sun. And of course, this gap that's in the painting is where the sarcophagus would be, you know, if we were looking at it. So remember I said about that guy standing looking at the painting with his back being in Aquarius. Well, this painting then was drawn. So Leonardo da Vinci painted this painting as if it was being viewed from the Aquarian age.
Extraordinary. And it's believed that he had visited the king's chamber and that he was purposefully encoding all of this information in this painting. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's just more and more evidence being gathered that that he was there and spent a lot of time. And, you know, from the more that I've gone into all of this, you know, there's even some more stuff about this that I'm completing at the moment about music also. It's just, it completely is a reconstruction of the King's Chamber. And, you know, Robert Grant had found actually symbols on the Last Supper painting leading to the fact that Taurus would be exactly here. So, you know, it's really a beautiful thing of piecing this all together, that now we have these two different mediums of the King's Chamber and the Last Supper that are mirroring each other. And so between the two of them, you can basically get this real understanding of what it's trying to say. You know, even for example, at the ceiling here on the grids on the ceiling, when we calculate that, actually works out to the same measurement as the moon. So, we have the sun and the moon and the astrological signs, going in forwards and backwards, with the sarcophagus in the center, and we know that the music aligns to the note B and then the note C, which link to the planets and the sun. I mean, it's just such a beautiful thing. But I was just absolutely, looking at this, I'm thinking, well, where would he be standing? When I was going through all of them, where would he be standing to paint, to paint this view if this was your eyes? So he painted it as like a time capsule for us to recognize it, that he is standing in the very place that we are in Aquarius, viewing this whole thing. So it's so like that kind of encoding, encryption of that is just, the beauty to be appreciated with that level of awareness.
And extraordinary that he's painting it, yes, to alert us, and that now, as we're moving into the age of Aquarius, we're seeing the code.
Yeah.
And understanding it, and also that he's depicted this Last Supper of Christ, who came at the beginning of the age of Pisces, trying to remind us of this mystical wisdom and how to come back into connection with the divine within us and how to become whole again. And he is so symbolic of the possibility for us to awaken and open to that enlightenment again, to open to that mystical awareness. Amazing.
Yeah, so beautifully said. Yeah, and I just think this, these things that are coming now, that we're really, managing to link these things together. It's such a beautiful picture, and however people could have discrepancies of this or that, but it's like I was saying about the star law. There comes a point when the technicalities, you all of a sudden they drop away, because you get the story, you get the gist, you understand it on a level that you no longer even need. It doesn't matter. It's a self-confirmation of what these things are trying to point to. And all of the teachings are reminding us that it's within, and it's without, and we're this projector, from our perception, projecting into the cosmos and seeing these beautiful constellations, and we are all these architects, archetypes, and it's all us, and we're moving through it in these two different ways. And so I think it's such a beautiful thing to piece it together. Now we can see the graph of the King's Chamber, linking it to now the Last Supper. It really gives us an idea of what was trying to be shared with those ancient traditions that are said they couldn't necessarily write them down. They were either verbally transmitted or done through paintings or through symbols, awaiting for us that are ready now to see them and bring them back into our collective consciousness.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I think you had another slide to share with us before we have to stop.
Yeah, I'll just so this is the last part I'll say about this, because I've literally just been doing this, so it's pretty new. I know there's a lot to read on there, so don't worry too much. But what I wanted to bring an awareness to was the angle of the Great Pyramid, and then the angle of the Grand Gallery leading to the King's Chamber. Now, the Grand Gallery angle could be, or the measurement is, say, 26 degrees or 26.1 degrees, but that's not necessarily a fully official degree. But to me, in a way, it didn't really matter too much, because again, it's like when you understand what it's trying to say, I think in time this will be the known, because if you recognize the numbers there, Heather, the 25920, the precession of the great year.
Mm.
So when we double that, double the octave, we end up with 51840. So wow, hold on a minute. So the angle of the lead up to the through the grand gallery, which, as I say, is the cosmos, is the grand gallery. So you're going into the grand gallery, you're going to the king's chamber that goes into the zodiac signs. That's the same angle as the precession of the equinox. And then when we double that angle, we end up with the actual angle of the pyramid itself. So this relationship of the hypercube and this doubling, which was the 126, that's really significant, because this, when you're going through that initiation, this is what I've found in this, that when you go through that grand gallery, you're going to the wedding chamber to marry yourself as one with the cosmos.
Beautiful.
And so, you know, that's why in a wedding you have a procession, wedding procession, right? So you have this procession, but yet we're within a precession. And so there's this, as you're walking through the grand gallery towards the king's chamber, you're actually going through the procession, the wedding procession. And then when you get into the king's chamber, you are then going and finding yourself in the precession. And again, it's just this beautiful mirroring of forwards and backwards in time. And I could not believe that the actual angle that you climb up is exactly, when we double it, the exact pyramid angle. I mean, to me, that was just...
It just shows you the advanced understanding and technology with which they built the Great Pyramid. And I know you, and I was just in a webinar with Robert Edward Grant this past weekend, and we were talking about the pyramid and how we both view it as having been built 12 to 13,000 years ago. And the other, and I'm putting out my own video soon about the precessional cycle, since that's my area of specialty. But part of what's fascinating in this, Rob, is that one of the things Robert Edward Grant and I were talking about in this last webinar is how the precessional cycle goes at different speeds as it's part of this binary star system. So when we're in the time of disconnection farthest from our binary star is when the precessional cycle is moving at this pace. When we get closer to the binary star, it speeds up, so that the full precessional cycle is actually 24,000 years. But this, to me, makes it even more profound, that it's saying, as you're in the time of disconnection and forgetting, you move to enter the chamber, to awaken and remember and come back into oneness again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, yeah, for me, the 24,000 years, it's really good that you put that forward, because when you look at this, these degrees or this, it actually links it to matter, to geometry, perfectly, absolutely perfectly. There are actually four dodecahedrons per great year. So mathematically and geometry, in the sense of form, these degrees make a lot of sense, because they match the form and geometry. But the 24,000 years, well, of course, we know that moves it more into time, because we have 24 hours in a day. So there's this beautiful link, as you say, between matter and earth, and perhaps you could say density, to then the understanding of time. And so the two things are running together. And of course, we know that matter is essentially made of space. So the space and time. And so, yeah, it's, as I say, the 25,920, you'll find that geometrically you'll find all of the shapes fit harmonically perfect into it, which is interesting because the pyramid is a form, it's an actual geometry. So that would make sense. But then this sense of time speeding up, as you say, with the binary system, there's this sort of the two are running side by side and we go through different phases. And so, yeah, I think it's a really great thing to be aware of both of them and how they work.
Yes.
But for me to find that this, the angle of the actual grand gallery before you get into the wedding chamber, or the king's chamber, which is the heart, so perhaps there's this sense of that we have to go through the procession, through the zodiac signs as we know it forwards, to get into the heart space, to then we can experience the great year of actually moving backwards in time simultaneously. So I think there's multiple profound things that we can work with this knowledge, and I'm just here to highlight what I've found, and it really gives us a great understanding that these great monuments of that are built are here they're all encoded with great keys of consciousness and how we can understand what it is we need to do to move forward into that next sphere of evolution.
Thank you so much for sharing this, Rob. And I think it is so significant that this is all emerging as we're now moving into the age of Aquarius. And what you're showing is how every angle, every aspect of this great pyramid was built encoding this mystical information to support us in this time in awakening and remembering and moving into this higher consciousness, but that every aspect of it is reflecting the sacred geometry, the archetypal energies, this mystical wisdom for us. But thank you for helping translate that and elucidate that. And this is extraordinary. And I know this is just the beginning of what we're going to talk about in terms of the other work that you've done. So thank
Yeah.
you.
No, it's so good, and I love sharing this with you, and your knowledge of the stars as well, and so many people have done different understandings of things like the pyramids, the angles, and unraveled all of those things. For me, it was like when I heard the words "the Grand Gallery," I knew what that was because it's the artistic understanding of the whole story of the stars, and so I can apply then knowledge of, say, angles to it, which, let's say, it kind of confirms what I already, perceived. So it kind of gives it like a validation. But it's so when we hear of these things like the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, these sort of things, it's just intuitively what was that meaning? Why, and where does it relate in our body, and so that. I say, for me, knowing that mystery tradition of that you would go down through a processional cycle to with the beloved, with the divine feminine or divine masculine, to then come into union, to be that oneness, and then to be the oneness with all. It makes so much sense to the story of this. And so I think what's really great to share with people is that sometimes when I started to learn, it's like, how do you know the angles? How do you know that is this? Or, well, it's like, just feel the story. Just go with the story. What is that story trying to tell you? And you can really know, and that will unlock things within you. And perhaps even geometries and codes and understandings will happen naturally, not that you have to actually learn them necessarily. So we can go at different angles you can go in mathematically and see it this way. Or you can just go in a feeling sense of, what is this trying to tell me? This whole story, why a great pyramid of this magnitude? Why was it even built? It can't just be for this one reason. It has to be a much more profound thing. And so that's why I say, like, knowing that angle, not just of the Great Pyramid, but its relationship to the Grand Gallery as a doubling of that octave, it's like, wow, that's what it's about. It's about moving into that next octave of our consciousness that's already available, it's already here. And you can do it through story, through beauty, through artistry, through enjoying the archetypes, and you can do it through quantifying it and through the maths, but they both work together, as we were talking about, the left and right brains, you could say, or masculine or feminine, but it's that cross bridging that we can use everything and everything, language, music, science, quantum physics, just pure story. I'm sure our ancestors, story was how they survived everything, how they functioned, how they learned. They didn't necessarily speak in numbers. So it's reclaiming that is, I think, is the most beautiful thing about all of this. And it makes it so much easier to learn and to retain that knowledge, because it's a story that is held within you already. And it's just a case of, yeah, that does feel like a dream that I once had, that everything lived in harmony, because it's there, cellular in the DNA, it's there.
It's so beautiful. And you really are describing the reweaving of science and spirituality, and that when we see through the eyes of the heart and our soul selves, the wisdom is already there. And then our minds can confirm it with the knowledge, but the wisdom is always within us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the profound work that you're doing. And I'm really excited to have you back and continue this conversation after I return from Egypt.
Yeah, I wish you many blessings with it, and I hope this map will help you and your group, and just to experience it perhaps in another way. And I think that understanding that being in that room is just a stargate to be at one with, as astrologers and things like that. It's such a dream that you can experience yourself at one with, not just learn. And so I think, yeah, I wish you many great experiences on your travels, and thank you for this. Thank you for sharing this new book coming out, and for having me on the show. It's a really wonderful to meet you as well. You're a very wonderful person, very knowledgeable, and I'm so privileged to be here. So thank you, Heather.
Oh, thank you, Rob. And I want to thank all who are listening and who are a part of this community, supporting each other to remember, to awaken, and to come back into that harmony. Thank you.